Hi, my name's Audrey Blessman. You're looking at 114116 South Liberty Street in Plymouth. The house is a duplex, and Phil and I bought it with my mother and father-in-law, Ruth and Richard, in 2004. And they lived on one side and we lived on the other. We now have Ruth and Richard's side of the house and rent out the side that used to be ours.
This means it's not just a home for us, but it's also a business. Business is one thing one would think would make money, but we don't make money on this project at all as we are doing so many repairs. But everything we do is intended to make it safe and a beautiful place to live and a wonderful place to visit.
Those who know me know I'm just really invested in the house and just do everything I can to fix it up. And just my heart is in Indiana. This is where I am, even though we're a bicultural family. This is my home.
We also have a strong tie to Culver Academies, where Phil taught physics and coached Quiz Bowl, and where I was an instructor of art and art history. I remember my dad saying, if you do what you love, you won't ever have to work a day in your life. And I love this house. I love working on it, and I love teaching, and I love my students, and I just want to be able to combine that and envision having a studio in the house where I can teach classes to residents or visitors or even former students. In general, I value privacy very much, just from my experience of being in Germany and how every yard is extremely private. And I also felt that's something I really wanted for just my tenants and also for anyone who might be participating in a workshop at the house. So again, it's more than just a house. It's a beautiful home, and it's a business, and also sort of a dream vocation. Hereby, we petition to vacate the 143 feet of public right-of-way on the north end of our property. So this is an aerial view of our neighborhood, with the top of the image being north. Of particular interest is the new city-owned parcel with gravel road. It's 16 feet wide and 150 feet long and connects the alley easement on Garden Court property to LaPorte Street, a city-owned gravel road in the middle of a city-owned parcel. Gravel road never comes in contact with the private property to the east, and there simply is no private property to the west. Not so for us. Before we had access to the LaPorte Street entrance, Garden Court residents, their friends, their family members, their deliveries, you name it, drove back and forth, 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 143 feet of our property. And I just want to emphasize that this is not like the alleys that you find in the rest of the city, which are on city-owned property. We own it completely. It's on our parcel. We pay taxes on it. And it has an express easement, which limits its use, which we'll talk about again later. But the same thing is true with Garden Court Apartments. They also have a privately owned 12-foot wide strip of land with a public right-of-way on it on their property. Our segment of easement is colored in pink, and it's 143 feet long, and the Garden Court segment of easement is colored in blue and is 312 feet long, so more than twice as long than ours. Garden Court acquired this large parcel in 1978, and by 1979, 60 units of Farmers Home Administration Section 515 low-income elderly and disabled resident apartments were completed. We'll talk about the size and configuration of their lot later. All of our property is now highlighted in pink, and it has our 1892 house on it. Notice the size difference of these two parcels. And notice that no part of Garden Court's parcel is landlocked. 280 feet on Liberty Street, 430 linear feet on Pennsylvania, and 2 access points to Gideon Street on the west side. I'll explain why this is relevant to LaPorte Street residents later. What's relevant now is that they and we and Garden Court residents and their family members, friends, deliveries, you name it, and even this property here all have access to the parking areas and garages via a city-owned gravel road and a city-owned parcel. If we look closely at the LaPorte Street ingress-egress, we can see some parts are gravel and some parts are poured concrete. That's the foundation to Tony's garage. Let's take a walk down memory lane to the bridge on LaPorte Street. Here we can see Tony's house and his front garage. He had one in the front and one in the back, and his adorable split concrete drive. On the very right is the LaPorte Street Bridge,
And if you look closely, you'll see a red fire hydrant. Just keep that in mind because it becomes important later on. Okay, get ready. We're going to look at it with the house demolished. Poof! Though seen from a slightly different angle, you can still make out Tony's split concrete drive on the left side there and, of course, the red hydrant. Now, why would the county tear down such a cute house? Though it was an adorable house from the outside, and Tony did a wonderful job with his landscaping, the house on the inside was just filled with black mold from repeated flooding. Looking at the floodplain map, you can see the whole house, the whole parcel, is in a flood zone. Considering the limitations of this parcel, it's definitely being put to good use. I shot this little video in June of 2020, just right after they repaved. It was around this time that an abandoned car had been towed finally from the lot, and police issued warnings to cars that were blocking the drive, and that basically resolved the problem pretty much within the week. So we petitioned the city to vacate the easement on our property and for a fence permit so we could stop through traffic. Speaking of stopping through traffic, we planted bushes next to the easement to stop people from driving up on our lawn. Several odd bits of information came out from our request for a fence, namely that the city had no knowledge of any public right-of-way or any easement whatsoever on our property, and that despite this, the city had installed public utilities along the 143 feet of our property, including buried storm and sewer lines, and permitting buried telephone lines, and permitting above-ground electric poles and electric wires. We have repeatedly asked Sean Cerisi for the utility easement records pertaining to our property, specifically the metes and bounds for the easement. To date, Sean has not provided us with these documents. On August 8th, prior to the city granting us permissions and permits for our fence, with the lack of records, we requested as property owners to establish an official agreement with the city pertaining to city utility maintenance. On September 11th, we let Sean know that we were willing to assure the city reasonable access to buried city utilities despite there being no record of a utility easement. But we felt strongly that there's no longer a compelling reason to grant the general public access to our property, an injury which outweighs the reasonable necessity of the general public's use of our property. On September 17, 2020, we receive our letter from Sean giving us permission to install our fence. In this letter, Sean claims, without having any evidence, a utility easement for our property. Sean knows he can't claim an easement without due process. Because we indicated that we were willing to work with Sean, it seemed to us like this letter was an exchange for no more through traffic on our property in exchange for a utility easement. Whether or not that's how Sean intended it, he offers us our fence permit in conjunction with stating that the city has a utility easement. Knowing full well there is no utility easement, and knowing our offer is contingent on our not having any more through traffic on our property. Without this agreement, and without a public record of an utility easement, there is no utility easement. What there is taking, a property taking. Let's see proof of this concept in action. As everyone might recall, last summer, NIPSCO was extremely busy on their rebuild project. Liberty Street was practically shut down for 2 weeks. This rebuild project involved NIPSCO installing extremely long poles immediately next to original poles that had been in place. And this is how NIPSCO was conducting this rebuild throughout the city. At one point, NIPSCO even blocked off the Liberty Street alley access on the north side of our house because they were working on poles throughout the street. That was probably the first week that I really saw the practicality of the gravel road. I mean, because we all had to use it and it was functional for everyone. And it gave me a lot of peace about putting in our fence. Well, it just so happens I came home and NIPSCO had installed one of their poles not next to the original pole, but in the middle of our front yard. I knew there was no utility easement on our property, and so I contested this installation. I didn't feel confident that my concerns to NIPSCO were being taken seriously, and I needed to up my game. So I thought it was time to put up the fence, and it worked. NIPSCO flew in a project manager who submitted the paperwork for our case. It took NIPSCO about 6 weeks for the legal team and their real estate team to concur that there was no utility easement on the property. And so they removed that pole and put it adjacent the original pole. No one in the auditor's, the recorder's, or the surveyor's office was able to locate any record of a meets or bounds for the utilities underneath our property, though we did get one from Sean for a different parcel of significance to us, namely a 1976 meets and bounds affidavit for the sewer easements on the property which Garden Court purchased in 1978. Which looks like this. We interrupt this petition presentation for a public service announcement. Full copies of deeds, relevant communication, and other documents are attached at the end of this petition presentation. Though this is merely just a sketch, the precise wording of this particular parcel is listed in the actual affidavit. Both easements on the property are highlighted in yellow to make them easier to read. Notice the size, shape of each, and the relative location of both these platted no-build but permission to pave easements. Only 80 feet separate the two easements at the river. Here's a full color version, again helping you to see the placement of both easements relative to each other and relative to a public road. I'll discuss the implications of the 1976 affidavit for the Garden Court parcel later. I also bring them up to show the public and the council that these meets and bounds affidavits actually exist. Easements exist for any kind of taking of land for public use. And easements also shape land use, and they are records of land transfers. So we'll talk about that later on. Why Plymouth City Attorney Sean Cerisi never researched or discussed deeds with us with respect to our request for putting up a fence to stop through traffic on our property and our request to vacate the easement eludes us, but that's what Sean did. And when he did so after having received the approval of every single department chair and after making specific commitments regarding preserving access to the LaPorte Street gravel road. And although we have to bring forth our petition, the vacation of the public right-of-way again, to satisfy the statutory procedures for this request, this does not change the fact that every single department chair inherently considered, presumed, and assured the continued use of the LaPorte Street ingress-egress as a part of their approval. Furthermore, Sean specifically wrote us an assurance in an email on September 15, 2021, that we and others have continued use of the gravel road on the city parcel, even with the upcoming bridge renovation project. So far as to say that the city would even make adjustments to the design if necessary. The only variable that has changed with respect to our request is the fact that an express easement exists. Sean claims that the ingress-egress is no longer possible because the Department of Transportation is specifically installing an ADA sidewalk, as if an ingress-egress and an ADA sidewalk are mutually exclusive. This is utter nonsense. The presence of an ADA sidewalk did not hinder approval of our petitions last year, and they shouldn't now. It shows that it's possible to accommodate our request. Next, Sean says that a footnote on the draft design that says abandon drive means that the entire street or gravel road should be abandoned, and this is not true. A statement of bad faith. The words abandon drive refer to Tony's 2 strips of concrete from his original cute little front driveway, which are pretty much crumbled now. The two prongs on the instructions clearly indicate these two strips of concrete. Here is a drawing of the actual area where the sidewalk will be placed, looking at the design with respect to the sidewalk placement and the fire hydrant. What we see is clearly that the ingress-egress will be made wider and even more functional after the renovations are finished. Furthermore, the Department of Transportation as do some of the other mishandlings of our property. There are missing agreements. Clearly, there's been some lapse of responsibility or some errors or some mismanagement of the city and its relationship to Garden Court and to us with respect to how the city has not managed the public alley on both of our properties. That Garden Court has maintained the snow removal for these two parcels for the last 40 years is a loss for them, and I think it would be fair for them to be compensated for those years of doing that work that the city should have been doing. Sever access to that gravel road. Furthermore, the Department of Transportation has the highest level of responsibility and the highest level of know-how in terms of constructing proper ingress-egresses and ADA compliant sidewalks. I trust them to do it right. And on top of it, additionally, LaPorte Construction itself will need to have a proper ingress-egress for the process of the actual construction. Though again, the city already promised that they would do what they need to do to assure that the ingress-egress will not be disrupted by any renovations or for Sean to assert that the City Council will not have the authority to grant a vacation of the easement of right-of-way on our property due to the LaPorte Street Bridge is absolute hogwash. Not to mention shameful. And lastly, with respect to the gravel road and the alley, I'd like to draw everyone's attention to the actual ordinances of the city. But before doing so, we conducted a general analysis of our neighborhood and concluded that the city devotes, on average, 44 linear feet of city-owned property per home for use as paved and fully maintained alleyways. Before we had access to the ingress-egress on the newly acquired parcel near LaPorte Street Bridge, the city devoted absolutely zero feet, 0 linear feet of public land for our use as alleyways. And we know that the city also didn't even maintain the alleyways that they were supposed to for our area. The newly acquired parcel already had a gravel road installed on it by Marshall County. So it costs the city virtually nothing to acquire a street and a paved and cleared off parcel. You can't get a cheaper alley than this little 150-foot long gravel road. The gravel road serves approximately 22 residents, 22 homes, and at 44 feet per home, we are eligible to up to 1,000 linear feet of city-owned land of paved and maintained alleyways. Yet, up till now, we've had 0. And now the 150 feet of gravel road is going to be blocked from our access. I think there's a problem here because it's not following the city ordinances, and it's also seems to be putting at a disadvantage people who are already marginalized in society, namely the elderly, people with low incomes, those with disabilities,